I've got some spectacular coins for us to look at today. One of the nicest things about the ancient coin community is that people often publish their entire collection and make them available for others to study, like people like you and I. And that's the case for what we're looking at today, the Colosseo Collection. One of the frankly best private collections of ancient coins out there. Last year, I made a video about the Colosseo Collection's Roman section, but the thing is, this gentleman also amassed a number of Greek coins. His Greek collection is actually much broader, like geographically and chronologically, compared to his Roman set, and it would be a sin not to cover this part of the collection. And the fact that his Greek collection is so broad in terms of, as I said, geography and chronology, creates an interesting opportunity for us, especially for those of us who are still figuring out exactly what we're going to collect, because ancient coins it's a very diverse niche of collectibles, right? There's pretty much everything under the sun. Now, I love telling stories with coins. You probably do too. We're all history nerds here. And with this collection, you can tell different stories with the different types of coins he has. You can enjoy this collection not just by looking at his entire Greek sub-collection as a whole, that can actually become very overwhelming very fast, but instead, this is the kind of collection that you can enjoy by looking at parts of it, by making mini sets with it. You can go on a mythological tour of his coins and show like the Greek pantheon. You can look at different cities that held different gods and goddesses as like their patron deities, and you can see their representations of these gods. You can look at coins like struck by opposing sides of the same wars, so you can illustrate like entire conflicts purely numismatically. This collection is a great example of how you can make one large collection with like this overarching theme, while at the same time having a series of subsets, like mini collections that actually talk between themselves to create a unified collection. It's a great way of assembling like a proper collection rather than an accumulation of coins. Now, this is one of the hardest things about ancient numismatics. No one is going to hold your hand and like tell you what to collect. You need to come up with a set yourself. However, this also generates the opportunity for some very creative collections. I'll leave all of the links, of course, to the collection available in the pinned comment in this video, so you can check it out by yourself, but allow me to comment on some of my personal favorites, like analyzing them a little bit deeper. They were hard to pick, I'll tell you that. So what I've done is a chronological set of 8 coins, spawning from the classical to the Hellenistic periods. And as you will see, each coin talks to the next, even if they're not necessarily from the same series. It's amazing. Let's get started. And we start really strong with my personal favorite of this entire episode. Despite this being a tiny little coin, it weighs just 1.43 grams. But these are probably the 1.43 grams of metal with the highest density of historical significance in them. From the design, does it ring any bells to you? It looks like an Athenian tetradrachma, doesn't it? With the bust of the goddess Athena on the obverse and a couple of little owls on the reverse, with the alpha, theta, epsilon letters, the abbreviation for the Athenian people. However, as you might have noticed, this is made out of gold rather than silver, and of course it's small. The silver tetradrachma is a pretty respectable coin of 17 grams, the more famous one. Now, what makes this coin special is that it was struck at the very end of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. This coin is dated right around the year 407, 406 BC, a couple of years before Athens finally surrendered. When it was struck, Athens was in a desperate situation, and it had lost access to the mines of Laurion, where it got most of its silver from, meaning they had lost access to their main source of money to fund their war efforts. The situation was so bad, Athens at first had a strategic reserve of silver in case it lost access to the mines, but it quickly spent it all. So Athens had to start striking special gold coin issues. Gold wasn't normally used as a monetary metal in the classical period. The Athenians had 7 huge statues of the goddess Nike guarding their treasury. The statues were covered with thick sheets of gold and were meant to represent the absurd wealth the Athenians had access to. But there they were, at the end of the war, in a desperate situation, and forced to strip the gold cover from the statues, melt this gold down, and strike coins with them, in this desperate last attempt to pay for something resembling an army. This means that this humble little coin here, the gold we see here, was once part of the cladding of these statues. Statues that were right in the middle of classical Athens, during its golden age and during its downfall. I mean, how incredibly cool is that? This is one of the factors that distinguishes ancient coin collecting from modern numismatics, not just in the appeal of the coins themselves as a collectible, as an art object, but because these connections to the past have a real monetary value, depending on how impactful the historical moment was and how close the coin was to the context of that event. You know, the whole question of who might have held that coin, what historical events would this coin have been a part of. Most ancients can be connected to some historical event that we can trace, but generally their connections to events tend to be very abstract. Like you can own a classical tetradrachma of Athens, something that was made at the same time and it circulated in the same city where people like Plato and Socrates when they lived, and we can all dream that maybe these legendary philosophers might have had our particular coin in their possession at one point. Sometimes just the fact that the coin was contemporary to these men and once existed close to the person might be enough to just make someone pay whatever the price is for these coins. But as we can see here, the experience of closeness with the past that a coin such as this one evokes is very real. It's not abstract. It's not a remote possibility. Not only that, this particular type of coin was very well documented back then. There are poems that mention these gold coins made at the time of the fall of Athens. There are mentions to the dies that were used to striking these coins being kept in the roof of the treasury. And of course, we have the documented source of the gold used to make these coins. So there are proven links between this coin, the gold in this coin, the historical moment, and the important object of interest, which were the statues. I mean, it's just incredible. It gives this coin a level of majesty that is hard to beat. This is real history in your hands. And yes, as you can see, I am excessively excited about this little coin, because it is proven, real, tangible part of the fall of Athens. Alright, let's continue in around the same time period, because this next coin was also struck around 406 BC, but this one was made under completely different circumstances. It's a commemorative coin rather than an emergency issue. What we have here is a tetradrachma of Syracuse. Classical Syracuse is famous amongst numismatists for producing some of the most beautiful and elaborate coins ever made in the classical world. Syracuse was located in the island of Sicily. Well, it is located, the city still exists. And it was in the outskirts of what was considered the, let's say, civilized Hellenic world. It was always in conflict with Carthage, the city, and personally, I think the difficult position Syracuse was in probably explains why the city produced such wonderful coins. I mean, from its gold coinage down to the smallest bronzes, every single coin of Syracuse is artistically very well made. And let's not forget, hiring these skilled artisans was expensive. So it's likely that Syracuse needed to reinforce its Greek character against Carthage. They had to constantly show themselves as this pure bastion of Greek heritage, even if they were located so far away from the original Greek homeland. And one of the ways they advertised their Greekness was through coinage. Coins were meant to circulate, of course, so they knew their coins would make their way to foreign markets, so they had to make sure the coins looked and felt as good as any other coin from any other major polis, in order to reinforce their public image, and maybe attract allies in the overall Greek sphere. They certainly needed as many allies as they could, since Carthage was constantly trying to conquer them. And the importance they gave to their coins is manifested in these incredible images. What we have here on the obverse is a facing portrait of the patron goddess of Syracuse, the nymph Aretusa. At first glance, the image is it is impactful enough. I mean, it's this wonderful goddess straining right at you. But the more you look into the image, the more you discover tiny little details that make it more and more interesting. That's one of the quirks that makes Syracuse incredible, the complexity of their images. So for example, you can see that a good part of the flan is occupied by her hair. Yes, it's complex, full of beautiful locks, but it's not only that. Since she was a water nymph, it wasn't enough to just show her as a pretty goddess. We can see that her hair is actually like flowing. She's not only looking at you, she's doing it from under the waterline, and the underwater currents are like blowing her hair in different directions. I mean, awesome and very fitting considering she was a water nymph. So she's looking at you from beneath the water, and we can see some lovely little dolphins swimming around her head, as if protecting their goddess. The one on the left is the one I like the most. You can see that the dolphin is actually swimming between her hair flocks. There's like a flock of her hair covering the middle section of its tail, so it gives the whole image an extra layer of three-dimensionality. This obverse also has some very discrete inscriptions on this part. That's another interesting point here. Normally, legends are very clearly visible. I mean, it's written message, especially later in the Hellenistic period as kings wanted to advertise their rule. The legends become like very easy to read, very direct, very big. We're going to see some of these coins later, but here in this classical coin, the legends are kind of like hidden. We can see that the focus of the entire coin is really to show a beautiful image first and foremost, and the show of sovereignty of the city comes second. Like, think about it, this feels like a wasted opportunity of advertising your sovereignty. And the only plausible reason that I can think of is because, once again, it's to reinforce this idea that the effort they are putting on these coins was mostly as a propaganda move, not only as a tool of commerce. As for what is in the inscriptions, at the very top of the coin, outside of the beading, we see a little arethusa written in Greek, so the name of the goddess. And if we go back to the left section, right next to that dolphin, we can read the abbreviated sigma omega, which probably means sotera, or the savior. So, why would Arethusa be called the savior here? Well, it's anyone's guess really, but personally I think this is probably a commemorative coin celebrating either a victory won by Syracuse over Carthage, their main enemies, or because around that same time there was a failed expedition of Athens against Syracuse, so it could be a commemorative issue for both events, and they were thanking Arethusa for her intervention. Generally, the most common depictions of the goddess in these types of coins are the side portraits, which are hard enough to make, so imagine how much extra time and attention to detail would a facing portrait like this one take from the die engraver. And as we go to the reverse, there's more wonderful art. Before looking at the design itself, let's take a look at the lower part of the coin. There's a bit of flatness here in this part, but what's supposed to be here was first an inscription, Syrakusion, meaning from Syracuse, and under it the name Kimon, a signature of the master die engraver who sculpted this die. We know the name of many of these masters that worked in Syracuse, men like Ioanitos, Kimon, Eumenes, there are a few others. So imagine that. They were so proud of their work that they signed the dies. In a way, that was a smart move on these men. Like, some people say you only truly die when everyone forgets about your name, everyone who's living forgets you ever existed. So in a certain poetic way, Kimon here is still enjoying his immortality through us, through coin collectors. As for the scene over the signature, we have this dynamic scene of a quadriga, so a chariot pulled by 4 horses, viewed at like a slight angle that actually demonstrates Kimon's grasp of perspective. It looks like the scene captures like the precise instant, like either just after the rider crosses the finish line or right at the moment the race started, because we can see like the charioteer firmly holding the rein, he's whipping the horses with his staff. You can actually see the individual reaction of each of the horses. Each one is sort of like pulling their heads in a different direction. And the charioteer, which likely symbolized Syracuse itself, its people, like winning the, the race of life, is being crowned by a little flying Nike. So yet another mention to victory. I mean, the whole scene, the whole coin, in fact, obverse and reverse, they're both full of movement. So it totally deserves a mention in this list. And for the next coin, we make a small detour from Greece and we go to classical Egypt to check out the only gold coin struck by a native pharaoh. So this is a gold stater of Nectanebo II, struck in Egypt during the 4th century BC. Egypt was one of the richest and most sophisticated civilizations in the ancient world, and it had access to enormous quantities of gold. But strangely, the Egyptians never really developed a native coinage of their own. Their economy had functioned for thousands of years through commerce of precious and non-precious metals by weight, so not coins by weight, and other commodities such as grain. Egypt, in fact, was blessed as far as ancient standards go. It either had everything it needed, or it could acquire it by trade with their immediate neighbors. So the very idea of striking little pieces of metal and declaring them to have a fixed value was essentially an overcomplication of things. It was unnecessary. But by the time of Nectanebo II, Egypt was surrounded by cultures that used coins, and the pharaoh desperately needed Greek mercenaries to defend his kingdom against the Persian Empire. And Greek soldiers were expected to be paid in struck money, in coins. So the Egyptians had no other option but to adopt this foreign technology. It's not like they monetized their society. This would be something carried out by the Ptolemies a few decades later. But Nectanebo made these coins anyways to pay for the Greek mercenaries. And he picked a curious set of designs for his coins. On the obverse, we have a prancing horse, shown moving like dynamically to the right. Very simple choice, but still the horse is very well rendered here. Considering this was the first Egyptian attempt of making coins, the design is actually quite well made. We can see the proper depictions of the musculature of the horse, all in its proper place. Apart from the obverse, it's on the reverse where this coin really becomes remarkable. Because instead of using Greek letters, the coin displays two genuine Egyptian hieroglyphs. This is, up to this day, the only confirmed coin, so an object made in mass, not a one-off piece of art, with hieroglyphs. We have two letters here. The first is the hieroglyph Nefer, represented by a heart and a windpipe. It meant something like good, beautiful, more like perfect. And beneath it, it's the symbol Neber, a stylized gold necklace. And this represented the metal, gold. So together, these two symbols, they read Nefer Neber, or like good gold, perfect gold, fine gold. So in other words, the reverse is literally describing in hieroglyphics that the metal this coin was made out of was of high quality. And I mean, just think about how remarkable this is. This is a coin constructed according to a foreign monetary system intended to pay foreign soldiers, but its message is entirely Egyptian. It does not show like a Greek god or like carry Greek inscriptions. It doesn't have anything you expect to find on a coin of the time. Instead, it uses this visual language that had been employed in Egypt for thousands of years and only now made its way into coins. Sadly, Nectanebo would be one of the very last of the pharaohs. The Egyptians were conquered by the Persians shortly after this coin was made. And then, after Alexander's conquests, one of his generals, Ptolemy, would take Egypt as his personal dominion, and then he would finally introduce standardized coinage into these lands. But of course, these were not native Egyptian coins anymore. These were Greek coins introduced in Egypt. And that's the amazing thing about this coin, right? It's one of those what-ifs. Had Egypt survived, had it stayed independent under its native dynasties, how would Egyptian coinage evolve? Would it even evolve into something? Would they adopt coins? Or was this a one-off experiment just to pay for mercenaries? If you ever wonder what ancient coin collectors discuss over a glass of beer, that's the kind of stuff we geek about. Then we go to a coin of another pharaoh, the first Greek pharaoh, Alexander the Great. And yes, Alexander was crowned pharaoh in 332 BC. When he marched upon Egypt, he was received by the country's priests in Memphis and he was crowned pharaoh. Now, one of Alexander's main accomplishments was the implementation of a unified monetary standard in his gigantic empire. Actually, the system he imposed would be continued by his successors for centuries. His coins were made in dozens of different mints. In Egypt, for example, he established at least a few mints. But what we have here is yet another special coin issue. Alexander began his reign nearly bankrupt. He was in debt for 500 talents of silver. That's 30 tons of silver. But his fortunes changed after his conquest of the Achaemenid Empire. The Greeks knew about the large gold and silver treasuries the Persians had, but everyone was surprised about its size. It turned out to be 5,000 tons of gold and silver. This enormous treasury allowed Alexander to give a prize of 1 entire talent of silver to each of his veterans. This prize wasn't paid all in silver, a part of it was also given in gold, and what we have here is a coin that contains some of that gold captured from the Persians. The highest denomination in Alexander's monetary standard was the gold stater. It had on the obverse the image of the goddess Athena, the typical helmeted depiction of her that is so common in Greek art, as this vigilant defender of the Greek people. And on the reverse we have a winged Nike, the messenger of Zeus, who would bring the news of victory to those chosen by Zeus to win the day, with a very clear, to the right, Alexandro, or of Alexander, right next to her. This advertised, of course, who made the coin, under whose authority this coin was made. That's one of the things of Hellenistic coinage. The messages become very explicit, like, I made this coin, I am sanctioned by the gods. The Hellenistic period was a time when the city-state gave way to these huge kingdoms, so the message on the coins adapts itself to this new reality. A single gold stater was worth 20 silver drachma, but what we have here is a much rarer die stater, so a 40 drachma piece. 17 grams of gold, that is a lot. Most of the captured treasure from the Persians was transported back to Alexander's native Macedon, where it was struck into coins. This particular piece, for example, is attributed to Amphipolis, so right in the heartland of Macedon. And this would have been given to the veterans as they returned to Greece after the campaign. And this was a more practical way of paying the troops, like this particular type of coin. After all, you only had to strike a single large gold coin instead of 40 silver drachma or 10 of the larger tetradrachma. And you know what? I think this particular type of coin was probably disliked by most people because it's not very practical. Considering your average citizen earned at that time around 2 drachma a day, that's 20 days of work in a single coin, so good luck getting your change for that. Such a coin was probably only really practical for some major expenses like buying a house, a plot of land, a horse, or as simply a way of saving your money for the future. On the other hand, the fact that this coin is twice as big as the normal stater also means that the die engravers had more space to put their art in this coin. So not only these coins are very rare on themselves, but they are also much better looking than your average single stater. We see lots of smaller details that would have been too small to be replicated in the single stater. Like, for example, the small details on Athena's flocks of hair. Her face and her eyes are also much more delicate. We can even make out the little details around her eyes. And on the reverse, everything once again receives an extra layer of resolution. The wings of Nike actually have little striations on each feather. Her dress has a more realistic texture. We can make out small details on the fabric. Everything just looks more fluid. And the face of Nike, it's actually what I really enjoy this part. We can actually see tiny little eyes, for example. This little eye was less than 1 millimeter long, so it must have been very hard to make. But in the case of this coin, all of her facial features are here, so that's also fantastic to see. The face of these coins generally don't have much detail in the single staters because simply there wasn't enough space. It looks like Greek die engravers actually had access to some kind of magnification device, something like lenses made out of crystals, but even these could only get so much magnification, so when you get to these tiny little details, they couldn't really do much about it. But in the case of this coin, they had enough space. Okay, let's check out another Hellenistic piece. We continue discussing Alexander, but this time in a posthumous coin. Here's another type I particularly love. This is a stater, now just a single stater, issued by one of his successors, a man called Lysimachus. He was one of his bodyguards. Lysimachus managed to carve the territory of Thrace as his personal dominion after Alexander's very sudden death. And he issued coins that mention himself in name, in authority, but he didn't dare, let's say, to take the next step and actually put his own image on the coins. What he did instead was to put the face of the now deified Alexander on them. Now, I mean, apart, of course, from the clearly supernatural horns we see coming out of his head, this is what Alexander looked like. The horn, called the Horn of Ammon, is meant to symbolize Alexander's new status as a divinity, and most of the successor kingdoms just kept issuing coins with Alexander's old designs as a way to connect themselves to Alexander and gain some legitimacy in this way. But Lysimachus was very tactful, because this is the face of Alexander that we have here. This is another topic that generates a little bit of controversy, right? There are discussions if the image of Heracles in Alexander's lifetime coins actually features his portrait or not. I personally don't think so. The Argead dynasty, Alexander's dynasty, they commonly put Heracles on their coins, so I don't really see Alexander going a different route there. But here in these Lysimachus types, we know for a fact that this is Alexander. So if you ever want one of the first portraits of the great conqueror, you can go for either one of Lysimachus's silver issues or something exquisite like these gold staters. And the reverse is also very impactful. We have the image once more of Athena, but now it's like a full body image. We can see the image of the goddess seated on a throne, quite a relaxed pose, but she's definitely not resting. I mean, just look at it. She has her spear and her shield right next to her, and she holds like a little Nike in her outstretched hand. I absolutely love this reverse. It's probably my favorite Hellenistic reverse. It's such a famous type, in fact, that many 19th and early 20th century coin designs from European countries, they show some kind of reinterpretation of this image during the neoclassical period they were going through. But of course, they adapt this image with like European national personifications based on this Athena. We can think of Britannia for Britain or Helvetia for the Swiss. They have their own reinterpretations of Athena put on their own coins, because this is actually like a really good symbol for a nation. It's a female, it's a nurturing entity, but it's also vigilant. It looks like she has the potential of causing harm. So it's a great symbol. And finally, to the left and right of the image, we have Basileus Lysimaco of King Lysimachus, so the only overt advertisement of Lysimachus ruling on his own right. And who can we credit with being the first of the successor Greek kings to put his own image on coins? Yep, we're going back to Egypt again, because this honor falls to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals. For a good 20 years after Alexander's death, Ptolemy secured Egypt and solidified his position there. He even stole Alexander's body and brought it to his capital, Alexandria, to place it on a mausoleum there. This gave him huge amounts of legitimacy. To bury the previous king gave you the right to be the next king in Greek tradition. And Ptolemy did in fact secure the most stable and longest lasting of the Hellenistic kingdoms. So what we have here is, once again, a stater. This one was struck around the year 300 BC, when Ptolemy finally declared himself king of Egypt on his own independent right. His portrait would be featured on most Egyptian precious metal coins for centuries. And as we can see in this coin, it's actually his own portrait of a living man. That's not a god, that's not like a dead king, that's Ptolemy on the flesh. And only on the reverse does Ptolemy make some connection to Alexander. So we have the image of like a deified Alexander. He's holding a thunderbolt, which is a very cool choice of design because it connects Alexander here to Zeus himself. Let's remember Zeus wielded his mighty thunderbolt, which he used to strike down anyone he didn't like. And he's pulled by what I can only assume was the world's biggest chariot, because it's being pulled by 4 elephants. Ptolemy makes uses of elephants quite a lot on his coinage, because when he was a general under Alexander, he distinguished himself in the later stages of their campaigns, when they were fighting in India. So the Ptolemy uses the elephants to symbolize India. So he's making a reference to the moments he was the most important in Alexander's campaigns. Above him, we have the proclamation of authority, Ptolemaio Basileus, of King Ptolemy. Some variations of his coins also call him Soter, savior, but in this case we have the normal Basileus. I mean, it's just a marvelous coin. If you are fond of gold coins, Ptolemaic gold is breathtaking. This coin is nice, yes, but the Ptolemies issued some of the most diverse and some of the heaviest regular issue gold coins in the ancient world, with the largest, the Mnaieion, weighing over an ounce of gold. Egypt had lots of gold mines and they had easy access to gold mines from Africa, so they were the kingdom that had the easiest time making so many gold coins. So yeah, if you want to make a jump from a gold stacker or a collector of other types of gold coins to an ancients collector, but you love your gold and you still want gold coins, you're certainly gonna have lots of fun and spend lots of money with the Ptolemies. Hi, I'm Leo, the voice behind Classical Numismatics, and if you want to learn how to collect ancient coins but don't know where to start, I have the solution for you. In my course, The Ancient Coin Collector, I will teach you everything you need to know in order to enjoy ancient numismatics like you deserve. You will learn how to buy ancient coins, how to avoid fakes, how to pay the right price, how to identify coins. You will learn everything you absolutely must know. The links are in the video description below. Join us! The Phoenician peoples of Carthage were also a major coin producer in antiquity. Despite not being Greeks, they are often grouped together with the Greeks whenever you see it in the market. So in case you ever want to buy a Carthaginian coin, you look within the Greek section. And I couldn't skip over a couple of wonderful Carthaginian representatives in this collection. The first one is a massive 5-shekel piece. The picture you see on your screen now is spectacular already, but that's a kind of coin you really need to have the opportunity to at least once hold it in your hands so you get an idea of how imposing it feels. It weighs over 38 grams. It's massive. This particular issue is dated from around the year 260 BC, so when the first Punic War between Rome and Carthage was raging on. And frankly, if you've ever seen the coins Rome was producing at the time this other coin was made, you might have thought Carthage was the superior civilization that would win this conflict, because this is certainly of a level of quality, of refinement, and just sheer weight and silver that surpasses basically everything the Romans were producing at the time, with a wide margin in fact. Sadly for us collectors, nowadays precious metal Carthaginian coins are actually quite rare. There is a respectable number of their gold and electrum staters, but silver seems to be remarkably rare, especially something big and impressive as this. I wonder if this has to do with the thorough purging that Rome did of anything related to Carthage after its final defeat. So most of the coins we have today are either gold that was probably stashed away as soon as it was struck, or some of the small bronze coins which the Romans might have thought were too inconsequential to melt down and restrike after Carthage lost. So your best bet to get Carthaginian coins is either to go for one of the more numerous bronze issues or save up and go to the gold staters, because something like this 5-shekel piece is incredibly rare. So as far as design goes, what do we have here? The Carthaginians produced coins at many different mints, in fact, but the main capital mint produced coins generally with this design combo we see here. On the obverse, we have the main patron deity of the Phoenicians, the goddess of fertility, Tanit. We can see her in this very pretty high-relief portrait. Her hair is very nicely tied together, in actually similar style to what you could find in contemporary Greek coins. And she has on her hair a bunch of barley stalks, reinforcing this idea of a goddess of the harvest, of fertility in general. interesting facial features we see here, like more abstract. This style is more in line with Carthaginian engraving. The Greeks had more like rounded and frankly realistic features on their portraits. Tanit is basically ubiquitous in most Carthaginian coins, like of all denominations in fact. You would feature some kind of variation of the bust of the goddess. Also, there's also this cute little detail in the obverse that I love. Now, check out the beading at the border of the design, right? It is made of these very small dots, maybe even too small for such a large coin, but the dots were made that tiny on purpose because as they go around the reverse and they reach the neck of Tanit, they convert into a necklace worn by the goddess. Like it crosses her neck as a necklace, and then it continues on the other side. Like what a lovely little visual trick from the die engraver that adds a bit of charm and three-dimensionality to the coin. And heading to the reverse, now Carthage generally placed a horse here, either just the face of a horse, sometimes a full body image of a horse, one in front of like a date tree, some kind of palm tree, but in this special case here we have a Pegasus. The horse was meant to represent the husband of Tanit, another major god for the Phoenicians, Baal Hamon. This god was featured either as a personified image or as a horse, as his symbolic animal. There's actually this interesting story related to the foundational myth of Carthage. So let's remember Carthage was a colony of Phoenician settlers. So when they actually went to the site where they would found Carthage and they were digging the foundations of the city, they dug up the skull of a horse, and they considered this a good omen, a sign from Baal. Now, I admit that I would have been scared shitless of finding a horse skull, but hey, guess the Carthaginians were a very tough bunch, and they decided to hold the horse as one of their national symbols. It's quite fitting, in fact, as Carthage was also known for producing very high-quality cavalrymen. Now, we don't know 100% exactly where this coin was made, but we suspect that the fact that we have a Pegasus here, so a typically Greek animal, this could make us think that this could have been a coin issued and meant to circulate around Sicily, because this reverse certainly carries some Greek influence. Another interesting point that makes us think this was struck over there is for the legends in Punic script. It reads something that would translate to the territories, or like off the lands, off the foreign land, meaning something akin to this coin being made in the territories held by Carthage in Sicily. Therefore, what we could have here, if we could interpret this in a more creative way, is that this coin is a case of counter-propaganda from the part of the Carthaginians against both Greeks and Romans who had stakes within the island. So the Carthaginians were advertising their own sovereignty over the island with their coins. And after that 5-shekel behemoth, we have yet another Carthaginian piece. This one is from the Second Punic War, and it's one of my favorite numismatic mysteries that still hasn't been solved. So this is a single shekel, so a much smaller coin. This was struck around 220 to 202 BC, and if you recall your history lessons, this was the time when Hannibal was rampaging through Italy after famously crossing the Alps with elephants and spending years like ravaging the peninsula. Now, this is one of the types of coins that was issued to finance that campaign, and as we can see here, it has some very unique designs. It breaks that typical Tanit and horse design that I just mentioned. The more conservative attribution to this coin, to the images in here, is that on the obverse we have just the beardless bust of Melkart. Melkart was the Phoenician interpretation of Heracles. And on the reverse, we have the North African war elephant, a smaller type of elephant that was used in war by Carthage. We know about the use of these elephants in war because of Hannibal's famous crossing of the Alps with his army. And this army had originally around 35 elephants in their ranks. So they crossed the Alps with just a gigantic army and 35 North African elephants. How incredible of a feat would have been that? Now, they had their little bit of attrition there. Only 20 of these animals survived the crossing, but they were enough to help the Carthaginians win their first battle in Italian soil against the Romans. Sadly for the Carthaginians, the area of northern Italy has relatively severe winters, definitely too severe for animals from North Africa. So all but one elephant survived that winter, and it was said that Hannibal, he took pity of that animal and he took it as his personal mount. The news of his successful crossing spread like wildfire, and of course the Carthaginians had to use these animals as a piece of propaganda on their coins. I mean, imagine yourself like a Roman trader, someone finding one of these coins in trade, and there you see like these huge animals, and think, if you were ever recruited to war, after all, Rome was losing this war, this is the kind of beast you would have to face in the battlefield. What a powerful propaganda move that was. But leaving the reverse, we get to the most controversial part of this coin, the obverse. So we have this portrait of Melkart. Now, the image of Melkart on Phoenician coins is generally quite idealized. However, these particular types that we see here, they show a Melkart that looks unlike anything else previously made. Of course, we could always make an argument that Carthaginian engravers had a different style to those of Phoenicia, but we could also go a little bit further. We could make an argument that this coin might have had a portrait of one of the members of the Barca family. This could be Hannibal himself, or maybe Hamilcar Barca, his father, another major war hero. The Barcids, Hannibal's family, they ruled in Carthage's territories in Spain almost like if they were monarchs there. And this series of Melkart and the Elephant was also issued in Spain with once more very unique looking Melkarts, like with very specific facial features, not something you would expect from this idea of like, right, a god must have an idealized image. These were very personal. Now, I understand that any kind of bold claim like this one requires an equally bold proof, but all of the geopolitical ingredients for the placement of the Barcids in these coins, they're all here. The pieces match. The context of the war, these coins being issued to finance this war, Hannibal's incredible successes against Rome, the Barcids' powerful position within Carthaginian aristocracy. It's a fascinating possibility, which I hope gets explored further in the future. It would be awesome to have definitive proof that this is the portrait of one of Rome's big enemies, one of its big nemesis. Do you personally think this is the face of Hannibal? I would like to hear your arguments in the comment section. And finally, for our last coin of the day, let's mix Greeks with Romans. This is a coin from the very end of the Hellenistic period, from the years 86 to 84 BC, when Rome was swallowing the Greek world into its new empire. So this is a coin that is theoretically Greek, made in Greek standard. This is a tetradrachma. It was made in Hellenistic style. It's one of the so-called Athenian new style tetradrachma, so a later Hellenistic reimagination of the old classical Athenian owl. But this one was issued by the Roman general Sulla, as Sulla was dispatched to Greece to fight Mithridates VI and the rebel cities that rose in rebellion against Rome. So he made this coin when he was taking the city of Athens. And he had to finance the siege. He had to pay for the logistics of the siege. And of course, since he was in foreign territory, he had to issue coins that would be recognizable by the merchants of the area, where he would be buying the things to supply his army. Because, of course, the logistics systems of the Romans could only get so far in providing everything their troops needed. And here's an interesting thing. The Romans, they had no problems with adapting themselves and adopting like whatever worked best in a certain situation. They did it during war, like they adopted enemy tactics, enemy equipment that worked. A lot of the typical legionaries kit is actually, it's a mishmash of different influences from different peoples that Rome fought against. But they also made coins that were copies of the type of money that was commonly accepted in the area where they were invading. So Sulla here, he made these coins that closely resembled the ones made by Athens, the city he was besieging. How odd, right? And the differences, like visually, the differences are minor. Basically, small additions like of monograms to identify these coins as Romans, and of course the removal of any references to Athenian authority to show this was a Roman coin, while also not like keeping everything that didn't have to be changed in order not to scare away any more conservative merchants. these coins, these tetadrachma, were actually quite well accepted in the region. Maybe probably because of a certain fear anyone might have had of not accepting Roman silver and enraging the occupiers, that's for sure, but also because the coin is actually successful in replicating its appearance from the originals. And these are actually made of very pure silver. At the end of the day, silver is silver, and the merchant will accept good silver. So the obverse has this very nicely made portrait of the goddess Athena in typical Hellenistic fashion, quite realistic in its proportions. Very elaborate helmet with a triple crest. Like, I love this helmet. It's really gorgeous. There's like a Pegasus at the center. At the frontal part, there are like 4 horses, plus a whole bunch of small curves and decorations all over the design. It's a really fantastic coin. And to think this was made, like, contextualize this coin was made in the precarious context of a siege, so it's really impressive to see something that good looking come out of it. As for the reverse, we have the good old Athenian owl, the symbolic animal of Athena. It is standing over an amphora, and to its left and right there are little monograms, which most certainly these are like control marks of the coin issue. And around the design we have a wonderful little laurel wreath, although this flan is a little bit short, so a part of the design is off the flan. Another amazing coin, not only by itself as like this object of art, but as this show of how pragmatic the Romans were during war. They had no problems in copying the coins of their enemies, or basically copying anything that they had to copy in order to be successful. The Romans were very pragmatic. And here we have it, 8 absolute treasures of ancient numismatics. Now, I strongly recommend you head over to the Colosseo Collection website and enjoy the other incredible coins he has. As you could see from this video, it's one incredible coin after the other. And I would like to read in the comment section of this video which pieces of the collection are your personal favorites. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this episode, happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.